Hello, everyone. I'm Anita from Slowport Supply. This is a truly exciting workshop for me because I get to see my friend Simon, and we will talk about the water minerals for competition. So if you have brewed coffee before, you know that water is a very, very important part of coffee brewing. And today we're going to talk about some products that Simon has developed that will really make this so much easier and enhance their entire experience. This is part of the Origami Cup USA 2026 competition education series, but this is open to public, so there's a lot more people from all over the world to join us. Thank you, Simon, for joining us.
Thanks, Anita, and thanks to the team at Slowport for organizing this, and thanks to all of you for tuning in from all around the world, sometimes very late at night or sometimes very early in the morning.
So, Simon, I want to introduce you. You took second place at World Brewers Cup in Brussels. That's
Yes.
very fresh. So tell us a little bit more about it.
So exactly a month ago, I competed in the World Brewers Cup Championship in Brussels, and I took second place. I was representing Australia, so I won the Brewers Cup Championship in Australia for 2026. And this was my first time going to Worlds in Brewers Cup, but I've coached many, many times in the past, multiple
Right.
competitors. So not the first experience in the World Championship, but I'm very happy to take second place.
So
I'm also,
excited. Hmm.
yeah, that was great. Yeah, I'm also the co-founder of Apax Lab. We make mineral concentrates for coffee, and our company was born 2 years ago out of coffee competitions, where we were facing this issue of being able to create high quality waters for our coffee, but also being able to make adjustments and tiny little tweaks very easily. And so the company was born from research and development that we've done through coffee competitions. And now our products are being used by the vast majority of competitors all around the world.
So excited
But
because you also won another Best New Product award in San Diego with the Complex.
earlier, yes, with you guys at Slowport Supply, we partnered and we entered the best new product with Conflux, which is the latest product that we released back in January. And in San Diego in April this year, we won SCA Best New Products. And it seems that Conflux has been since then the most popular profile that we have released. It seems that a lot of people find it very versatile and that it brings an amazing mouthfeel to everyone's brews. So very excited to see that a lot of people have been embracing this profile. It was also the most used profile in the World Brewers Cup Championship as well. So yeah, very good
Yeah,
to see people excited about this one.
I'm excited because I know that there are people here who want to compete, who are watching this video who also wants to compete. You are from an education and innovation, and you are also a brewer, so you actually use your own products to compete, and you got really great results. And so are the finalists. The finalists are also getting really great results. 4 out of 6 World Brewers finalists this year use Apex. Is it all five? Is it 5 out of 6?
Actually five now.
Didn't
Yeah,
count you
five.
yourself, so yeah,
Yeah,
five. Yes, five.
five out of six of us in finals used Apex. In the
Five.
whole competition, we were 82% the field. And just to give some perspective, last year in Jakarta, we
Hmm.
had 8 out of 9 in finals because the finals was 9 people last year, and
Yeah,
we had 89%. And so you'll see a lot of people make their
amazing.
water for coffee with our
Yeah,
products essentially.
this is amazing. And you have 4 formulas. And so I think we coming
Yes.
into a room, we're like curious, like how do we use it? Are the formulas for a certain type of thing? I know that you also encourage post brew mineralization. So to learn about those formulas, I think is really relevant for example, if I want to do a quick tweak, if I want to do a quick dialing in, and then reapply
Yeah.
that formula back into the kettle. I know you have some tips and tricks for us today, and so I'm very
Yeah.
excited to get into it, shall we?
Absolutely. So
Okay.
before I jump too deep into the products yet, I'll say a couple of things about water for coffee. The reason why water for coffee is important is because when you're making brewed coffee, you're essentially using two ingredients. You're using coffee beans, and water. And obviously, the water that you get, depending on where you are in the world or even within the same city, you might have different results with different waters, and the water might taste different. Now, when we talk about different waters, we actually talk about different mineral composition within that water. So, water is basically water, which is H2O molecules, and you have dissolved minerals and dissolved solids inside. Those dissolved solids play a massive role in the way coffee tastes. And a lot of the time they get overlooked because they're invisible. And so you can have two glasses of water, for example, or two bottles of water that look identical because it's all transparent, everything is fully dissolved, but it will taste widely different and it will make a massive impact on coffee. And so what we did is study for about 7 years the impact that different minerals can have on coffee. And we reversed engineered different formulas in order to have very targeted results into the final cup. So throughout our research, we found out that some minerals highlighted the brightness and the acidity of coffee, others gave more sweetness and body, etc. And so what we wanted to do is make it easy for people to improve their water for coffee. And for me, the step number one in doing that was to deconstruct all of the complexity that there is around minerals. And so a lot of the time when if I give you, for example, magnesium chloride as powder or potassium bicarbonate, a lot of people feel very scared, and it's a bit daunting to know exactly how much to use and what it's going to do. And so instead of giving people individual minerals either as powders or as concentrates, we group them together in categories that will do a very specific targeted job. So that's a lot easier from a user perspective to know what you're going to get out of that. So I know I have a fairly good idea as to what calcium chloride does to coffee, for example. I know that if we're adding calcium chloride to coffee, we'll have more sweetness, we'll have more body, we'll get also that nice creaminess. But if we add too much, we might start to get a little bit of chokiness and dryness. But most people don't know that. So instead of giving individual minerals, we created different profiles that do very targeted outcomes. So let me introduce you to these profiles. The first one that we have is tonic. And as the name suggests, you're getting this effervescent, sparkling, mouth-watering, acidic quality to your coffee. So tonic is especially used or designed for wash coffees or coffees that have already a potential for acidity. Because something that we need to mention is that minerals do not create new flavors or new attributes. So minerals cannot create acidity, they cannot create sweetness, but they can highlight what is already present as potential in the coffee. So a good example is if you're taking a glass of water and you're adding a couple of drops of minerals and you taste it, you're unlikely to see the difference. But if you add it to your coffee, because coffee already has potential for acidity, bitterness, sweetness, different types of mouthfeel, you'll see the changes immediately. So essentially, if you want, minerals are like an amplifier. You get to amplify different things, or you get to mute certain attributes. Or it's like putting a filter on a photo. If your photo is just a white, a white background, you can put whatever filter you want on it, and that's not going to change anything. But if you have a nice photo with a lot of contrast and a lot of things going on, then by changing the filters or changing the saturation or the colors in your photo, you're able to do magics and you're able to take that nice photo to something amazing. So tonic, again, designed to bring more acidity, more brightness out of coffees. We like to use it with coffees that naturally have this potential for acidity, but sometimes that can be lacking a little bit of that acidity. Let's say your roast is a little bit too old and the coffee has started to flatten a little bit. Then using tonic gives it sort of like a fresh life again. It sort of like revives the acidity. It's also really good for, in my opinion, ultra light roasted coffees where sometimes because the coffee's been roasted so light, it tends to be a little bit flat, it tends to be a little bit muted, and so it gives you more acidity. In general, so the reason why it gives you so much more of that natural acidity is because we primarily use magnesium under the form of magnesium chloride and sodium under the form of sodium chloride and sodium bicarbonate. And these two ions, magnesium and sodium, do a great job at bringing vibrancy, this effervescent quality, and a lot of brightness. So In general, I love using tonic because I like really acidic coffees. So this is often a bottle that I reach to use as part of my brewing daily because I like very acidic coffees. It might not be for everyone based on your personal preferences. I know people that use jam exclusively, and we'll talk about jam in a second. And so that's also one thing that I find very interesting about coffee is that we all have different preferences. And if we were tasting a coffee made with tonic, we probably all agree that it is very acidic, it is very bright, etc. But some of you might go, "Oh, I love that." But some others might go, "Ah, this is a bit too intense for me. That's not really my style." And so that's the reason why we have different profiles. And again, I can make some recommendations as to what I would do, but that's also for what I enjoy. And so, in my experience, the choice of minerals and the choice of the combination between your coffee, your brewing recipe, and the minerals, it's very personal because it depends on what you want in the final cup. So now moving on to jam. Jam is our second formulation. And as the name suggests, jam denotes, here you go, you can see jam on the video with Anita. Jam denotes a certain level of sweetness and a certain level of creaminess and texture. So the inspiration is obviously like fruit jam that you can use to spread on toast. And we designed it to enhance the natural sweetness of natural processed coffees or anything with fermentation, so anaerobic or any sort of like new type of fermentation. So usually with these coffees, they have a high potential for sweetness and they already have also a good potential for mouthfeel and body. And so jam is going to push them in that direction where you get to celebrate that natural sweetness and you get to have this amazing round creamy body. And also with especially extended fermentations, you get to have sometimes a lot of acetic acidity, sort of this sort of like vinegary acidity that was created or lactic acidity that was created during the fermentation process. And sometimes it can give you really high acid coffees. And so jam is also designed to tone down and control and balance that high acidity from fermented coffees. So in general, when you're adding jam, you'll get a lot more sweetness. You'll get an amazing creaminess and roundness, almost this like richness to your coffee. And you'll also reduce the acidity. So it's something that I would not necessarily recommend for a coffee that is low in acidity if you want to celebrate that acidity. So for example, jam for washed coffees is not necessarily my favorite, but I do know people that use jam literally for everything. And so, and we won the world's Aeropress Championship last year using a profile, using a combination that had mostly jam. So again, the rules are meant to be broken. All I'm giving you is guidelines. It's up to you to explore, and it's up to you to determine what works for your coffee and recipe. Oh yeah, that's the Anita is showing on the video. This is the profile that we used to win the World Aeropress Championship last year with Nemo Pop from our team, and we ended up releasing the exact same profile and formulation from that World Championship. So then moving on to the next two profiles that we have, we've got Lilac and Conflux. So Lilac is designed to enhance the florality of coffees. It cannot create new floral notes, but it can highlight existing floral qualities in coffees. And so we design it for coffees like Geisha as a variety, Cedra, Pink Bourbon, or coffees from Ethiopia that naturally are very delicate and very floral. The secret ingredient in lilac to enhance that florality is sulfate under the form of magnesium sulfate. Sulfate is a secret weapon when it comes to highlighting floral notes. It highlights the pleasant bitterness that you might have in a beverage. So it gives you more of that citrus peel quality, it gives you more of that pleasant floral notes, jasmine, for example. And it works really well with this kind of coffees because it pushes them in their natural direction. If you're using lilac, let's say for a pulp natural catuai from Brazil that doesn't have much floral notes, it wouldn't create jasmine all of a sudden. But it would highlight maybe that the bitterness from that pinoty quality that you have in Brazilian or in some Brazilian coffees. So what's special about lilac is that we don't use any calcium at all. calcium is considered to be a top tier ion, and I would say in general, like you almost want calcium in everything because it's so sweet, creamy, and rich. But because we didn't want to make this profile rich, we wanted to make it very delicate and we want to make it very silky and refined, then we decided not to use any calcium at all. So the intentional absence of calcium gives you a really refined, silky, and delicate mouthfeel, which is something that, in my experience, in many parts of the world, people really enjoy. And that's the reason why geisha as a variety is really popular, for example. Obviously, there's always shortcomings with every profile when you use too much of them. With lilac, if you use too much, you might have an overpowering bitterness that appears. And usually for me, that's the number one sign that tells me, oh, I've used too much of it. And minerals, my favorite knowledge is that minerals are to coffee what seasoning is to food. The more you add doesn't necessarily mean the better. You'll get to a point where you hit the ceiling, and then every extra drop that you're adding to your water, to your coffee, is going to make it worse. And so it's up to you to determine what is that ceiling, what's the maximum for that specific coffee and for your specific preferences as well. And the last one of the family is Conflux. Conflux was released after the others. So this is the fourth edition or the fourth profile in the latest edition that we launched in January. We got SCA Best New Product in San Diego. It was created to bring balance, structure, and an amazing mouthfeel to coffee. So what we found is that sometimes there were some coffees where it was very difficult to it was very if they were really wild, it was difficult to balance them. And so you didn't necessarily want to push the acidity or give a lot of mouthfeel and heaviness like jam does. And so we wanted to have something that was really versatile and that was balancing pretty much any type of coffee. And so what we did is we created Conflux that intentionally doesn't have any magnesium. So magnesium again is a what I would call a top tier ion. It tastes absolutely amazing, but it also brings a lot of intensity. It also brings a lot of acidity to coffee. And so here we're not looking for higher highs. We're looking for more balance. And here we're tapping into the power of calcium, so for that potential for sweetness and mouthfeel, and very importantly, silica as well. Silica is basically quartz that you can find silica on the beach in sand, for example. And the silica that we use is a food grade silica that has been extremely finely ground that essentially gives to coffee this amazing, unmistakable, creamy, oily, textured mouthfeel. The kind of texture you get out of brews made with conflux, I think, is really difficult to describe until you've experienced it for the first time. But there's an element of richness that is extremely hard to beat. And the first time that we developed conflux was for the World Championship last year. We had the first prototypes, and the people who used conflux in the World Championship last year, and then same thing for my nationals last year, the scores that we all had maximum scores in mouthfeel. So we all had nines in mouthfeel. And another comment from the judges was like, I've never tasted coffee that had mouthfeel like this. And obviously, it's not just the minerals; it's also the combination of the. You need to take everything into account. It's obviously the green coffee, the roast, the brewing recipe, but the minerals, what silica brings to the final cup is an incredible texture. And so here with Conflux, I found it's very easy to use it. It's very versatile. It works with washed coffees, it works with naturals, it works with funky anaerobics. It's very versatile.
Yeah, so very excited to hear all the four formulas side by side now. In the beginning, there was one formula, but I think everything kind of came from the usage of minerals on the championship stage that you develop it for yourself. I saw that some new people came in. So this will be recorded. Don't worry, if you're late, you can always revisit the recording. Before you guys came in, we were talking about those four formulas and which each formula has a very specific usage or a specific impact on the coffee. And of course, I know that a lot of competitors, they not only use one single formula, but they also mix and match different formulas and
Mhm.
to get to where they want. Simon, can you talk a little bit? For example, I have this dripper. This is 100 mil, so there are two different
Yeah.
sizes, and there's one that is like more easy to carry. You can just bring it to
Yeah.
with you daily, and then there's more like you can use it at a bar. Um, Both of them are highly concentrate, right? So shall we talk a little bit about the usage before, and then we can go into that recipe, so everybody can kind of have some reference
Yeah,
point where to start.
for sure. So we designed the products to be used into your brewing water. So as in you start with a base of water that has little minerals or no minerals at all, like demineralized water. And then you can add your minerals and then you can boil your water and then you can brew with it. That's usually how minerals have been used in the past. You're basically reverse engineering your water and you're basically building it from scratch. But the innovation that we brought when we launched is that we realized a few years back that minerals could actually be used directly into coffee. And we realized that whether you were adding it to your brewing water or to your coffee directly made little to no difference at all. And so that was a little bit surprising to us in the beginning because a lot of the coffee literature at the time stipulated that minerals were essential to the extraction process of coffee. And it turns out that if you're brewing the same coffee with two waters, one that has a lot of minerals and one that has no minerals at all, and if you take the two coffees, obviously the taste completely different. But if you measure the extraction of the two coffees, if you measure the TDS and then basically work out the extraction, how much we extracted out of the coffees, you'll read the exact same number, regardless of the mineral composition. And so this basically suggests that minerals don't actually pull any coffee compounds out into the water. The water does that. The water is the solvent. The water dissolves coffee compounds. But what minerals do is that they shape the way we perceive different attributes when we're drinking the coffee. So if the water has a lot of magnesium, we'll perceive more acidity, more fruitiness. If the water has a lot of bicarbonates, we'll get a lot of structure and we'll mute that acidity. So essentially, what that told us was that whether we were adding the minerals before or after made little to no difference. And so it opened up a whole new world of possibilities in the sense that you didn't necessarily need to commit to one water when brewing your coffee. You could brew your coffee with any water, even with demineralized water, taste it, and then go, I think this coffee needs more sweetness today. I think it needs a bit more body and the acidity is too high. And then reach out for the bottle that does exactly that, which is, and you've guessed it, jam. Take a few drops of jam, try it and go, I feel like it could have more body. We can add even more body than that. And then add a bit more and then go, yeah, that's exactly what I want. And so the ability to improve a coffee post brewing didn't really exist until then. If you made a coffee at home in the morning or in a cafe and it wasn't tasting exactly the way you want, you basically had two options. Either you throw it away and you make a new one, or you serve it to a customer and then you're serving a subpar product. But now we work with approximately 2,000 cafes worldwide, and what we see a lot of baristas do behind the bar is adjust their coffee before serving it. So similar to what a chef would do in a really good restaurant before sending out a dish, you'd see chefs taste the dish and then make some adjustment before sending that to the room. So you can add a little pinch of salt, a little bit of lemon juice, for example, a bit of cracked pepper, and so that tiny little adjustments goes a long way when it comes to making better coffee. And obviously, that doesn't apply just to at home or in cafes. It also applies to competitions. So a lot of the time, we have a lot of competitors use our products for origami championships, AeroPress, Brewers Cup, and I'm not too sure what the rules are about the origami this year, but I remember in previous years we had people taste their coffee and then go, today it's lacking a little bit of acidity. Let me add one drop of tonic, and then boom, really open up the acidity in that cup, and then taste again and go, yeah, that's exactly what I want. I can serve my coffee this way.
Yes, Origami Cup rules, we are able to do post brew. And of course, like on World Championships, you will have to do something with the water first, which I think Simon has a mention later on in one of the slides. How do you translate that formula back
Hmm.
into your kettle so you're not post mineralizing, but you still get the same effect as
Yeah.
after you dial in? Let's take a look at those recipes. Yay. Okay, so we have four different ones, and Simon, you want to go through this quickly, or do you? Want to let us know
Yeah.
like how to dial it in?
So in general, the products were designed to be good on their own. So if you want to just use tonic, you can use tonic. If you want to use lilac only, that's also fine. But we also wanted to, so we wanted to mix simplicity with also giving the users enough choices and enough options. So usually in competitions, it's very rare that one profile fits a coffee perfectly. So what we often notice is that people blend different ones together. So it could be that you want more acidity out of your coffee, but you also want more sweetness and mouthfeel. And so that's why you can blend some tonic and some jam together. Now, there are plenty of recipes possible. And again, they're very coffee specific and they're very specific to your personal preferences. So what we've done is that we've created a calculator that you can go to on our website, apaxlab.com, and there's a water recipe calculator. And you can have a look at it. There's, I think, a good dozen of recipes that we've provided. But in general, I personally don't follow recipes very often. I don't follow recipes for cooking. I don't follow recipes for coffee, and I much prefer to do it by taste. Something that I find very useful is to understand what levers to move when you're using all of these different profiles in order to fix the coffee the way you want. And so I've given four examples here of literal use cases, things that might happen to you and happen very often when you're dialing in a coffee. So let's say you have a great mouthfeel, great body, good sweetness, but the coffee is lacking acidity. That to me straight away said, introduce some tonic. Tonic is going to give you that boost of acidity. You're still going to retain a great body and mouthfeel, but all of a sudden you're getting a bit more brightness. On the opposite, if your coffee is too bright, but the mouthfeel is too thin, let's say it's a really light roasted coffee, let's say light roasted Kenyan. So Kenyan coffees in general, very, very high acid. But then if it's very light roasted, you might not be getting a lot of body. And so in that case, you can introduce conflux or jam. Jam would work really well if it's mostly a natural, in my opinion, because you might bring the acidity down too much. Like it's very powerful at muting the acidity. But on the other hand, conflux is really good at just making those smaller adjustments. So bringing that texture, making sure the coffee is not too thin, and making sure it's not too bright either. It's not a drastic change. If you have a coffee that has potential for floral notes, but you wish the aftertaste was longer, lilac was designed for that. Longer aftertaste highlights and celebrates the florals in coffee. If your coffee is sweet but muted, so if you have this amazing mouthfeel and it's very heavy, very sweet, but the acidity is flat, again, we can introduce tonic to bring some of the acidity back. But if you already have a base with minerals, then this is when, for example, I would look at also reducing jam, for example, because jam is usually very potent at muting the acidity. So these are some of the use cases. We see people use only one profile. We see people use four profiles. We see people use two. So it's really up to what you need. And so my recommendation is, again, personal recommendation is to always start with a coffee that you brew with dimmerized water. If you're trying to dial your coffee for competition, brew it with dimmerized water, have a little sip, and then you'll see what the coffee itself with no other ingredients, because we've got two ingredients again. Remember, we've got coffee and minerals. You'll understand what the coffee on its own gives you, and then you'll see and you'll make the decision as to which minerals to use in order to compensate for the weaknesses and celebrate the strengths of that coffee. So this is the literally the blueprint that we follow for every single competition. Every single time we dial new coffee, we try it with no minerals to understand basically the baseline of that coffee. We understand that ingredient on its own, and then we build our wort from there.
Nice. So here, this is what you just mentioned before, to dial in the coffee. At slow
Mhm.
pour here, we also brew with demineralized waters, like basically zero water. And then we'll taste the coffee in its raw form, like this is what the coffee tastes like. And then you add the minerals post brew and scale the ratio back in the kettle. How do we do that, Simon?
So let's say we make a coffee, and then I like the recipe where I make the coffee, I have a tiny sip, and I go, yeah, I think I want 4 drops of tonic and then 2 drops of lilac. And I do that, and then I have another sip, and I go, yeah, absolutely love it. If your, let's say your yield was 200 mil, if I added 6 drops into 100 mil and I wanted to scale that back into my kettle to brew with, I would basically need to multiply that by five. So 200 mil multiplied by five, that's 1 liter. So basically, I would need to have 4 drops of tonic times five, so 20 drops into a whole liter, 2 drops of lilac times five, 10 drops. So 30 drops in total into my kettle. And so that's how we basically work backwards, how to build whatever you did in the cup back into the kettle.
Amazing, because I know that different competition has different rules. Some of them you're not allowed to
Mhm.
manipulate the brew after. It will be like additives to it, so you cannot do that. But it sounds like that we can still, after we taste it, bring that mineral proportion back into the kettle and use it in the water for brewing.
Yeah. So again, just to give you an example for the World Brewers Cup, I didn't add the minerals post brew on stage. I added them into my kettle. But what we did during the preparation process when we were dialing in the coffee, all of the water testing, we were doing that into the cup directly because that saves us a lot of time. It saves us a lot of coffee as well. Sometimes we make a brew and we split into multiple cups and then we're just adding 1 or 2 drops into each cup just to see which direction we want to take. And so that allows us to eliminate certain profiles and we can go, yeah, it's too acidic already. So tonic is not an option. We need more sweetness and mouthfeel. So we're probably looking at cornflakes and jam. And so working it like this has been very useful for us to dial the coffee. And then usually what we do is we work out the recipe and then do that directly into the kettle. But if you have the ability, something that I like doing as well is sort of like a hybrid model where you have you're billing your water basically into your kettle, you're brewing with it, and before sending it to the judges, you taste it and you go, ah, somehow what something happened and it came out with a little bit less acidity than I thought. And then it says when you still have the opportunity to go boom, 1 drop of tonic and then fixed it. So we basically build the concentration of the minerals in the bottle in a way that it's not too concentrated that 1 drop is still fine and you're not overpowering the brew, but also that it's not too diluted that you're adding like 10 drops to make a small impact. So it took us a lot of like trial and error to figure out what was the best concentration of the minerals in order to be as versatile as possible, whether it's behind the bar, at home, or in competition.
Awesome. We have some time to take some questions. Before that, we have some ppm questions here
Mhm.
on the slide. I know that different regions have very different um, hardness or like minerals or other things in the water. So we do in at Apex, we have a little tester kit. On Slowport, there's like a starter kit that you can actually test your water. And of course, then different ppm gives you a very different result for brewing your coffee. So this slide, Sam, will you walk us through how to
Yeah.
use the slide?
So ppm stands for parts per million, and this is the unit that we use to measure the concentration of minerals in water or concentration of dissolved solids. So ppm doesn't give you the full story. It doesn't tell you everything about your water. But my favorite analogy is that let's say the your water is basically it's basically a nightclub, and there's multiple different songs and music that can be playing. What the TDS meter tells you when you're reading the concentration is that it tells you if the music is loud or if it's very low, but it doesn't tell you what kind of music is playing. So you could have very loud heavy metal if the concentration is very high, but you could have also very loud country music, for example, or techno. And so all of that tells you is if the music is loud or not loud. So if you're sticking your TDS meter into tap water, for example, and if you're in, let's say, London, the TDS of tap water is usually at around 400, 500 ppm, which is it's way
Ah,
too high for coffee brewing. So
right.
regardless of even if you have the right combination of minerals, you're too high in concentration to have anything remotely tasty. And so what the TDS meter tells you in that case is it doesn't even matter what music is playing, the music is too loud. So let's like we can't go to that club because the decibels are way too high. It's not going to be enjoyable. And same thing, if, for example, if you look at Melbourne, and I believe New York might be the same. Very soft waters from the tap. In Melbourne, for example, when we get water from the tap, the water comes out at like 25 to 35 ppm, so it's very very soft. It's very little minerals dissolved inside, and
Mm.
so it means that it's the volume is very low. It's not very loud, and so usually the problem when the volume is very low is that you're lacking that intensity. And the sweet spots in our experience is anywhere between 60 to 90 ppm in concentration. Let's say the vast majority, 80% of the coffees will shine most, or 80% of brews will shine most between 60 to 90 ppm. Now, there are exceptions where you can go lower, and there are exceptions where you can go higher. And in my experience, this is something that we're still trying to establish a correlation between that. But the best guess that we've had recently, and the best pattern that we've managed to establish, is that the intensity and mineral concentration is linked to the strength of your brew. So if
Mm.
you have a very weak brew, you'll need a lot of minerals to compensate the intensity. A very weak brew might lack mouthfeel, it might lack intensity, but putting more minerals into that gives you that intensity back. And that's
Right.
usually a style of brewing that I have, where I make fairly weak brews at very low extraction levels. So my coffees tend to be a little bit too acidic, and they tend to be lacking mouthfeel. But then I go usually at 120 to 140 ppm. So I add a lot of minerals to my water, which, in my opinion, do a better job at adding extra mouthfeel and texture than going finer, for example. I find that if I go finer, trying to get more mouthfeel and body, I tend to have more dryness, I lose clarity in flavors,
Mm.
the acidity is compromised. And so I find that to get maximum clarity of flavors, I usually go really coarse and add more minerals. But if you're making slightly stronger brews, you'll find that if you have a strong brew that has already a lot of intensity, and then you're adding more minerals on top of that, you'll
Mm.
have something that's overpowering. You'll have something that feels just a bit too intense. You might get more dryness, you might get too much bitterness. And so, in general, really strong brews tend to do better at lower concentrations of minerals. So this is kind of like a rule of thumb where I've started being able to guess people's grind size or people's strength of coffee without tasting it, just with them telling me, hey, I use water at 45 ppm. And I go, you must be like either grinding really fine or having a stronger TDS in your brew. And usually go, oh
Wow.
yeah, I brew at 140, 145. And it all makes sense. And so people who go, I use 120, 130 ppm in my water, there's a very high chance that their brew is on the weaker side, because
Mm.
it's unlikely that they get a good result with a very strong brew and a lot of minerals. So think of it as an equation. It needs to be coherent. So you can be on either end of the spectrum, but it needs to be coherence. And a lot of the time we see people that just put in the middle. They have a brew that's balanced at like 125 to 135 TDS for filter coffee, and then they're sitting anywhere between 60 to 90 BPM.
Amazing. I have this question, our standard of the PBM recommendation for the water changed. Do you think that that is correlated to how our roast profiles changed?
Yeah, it's definitely linked. So initially, I used to think this was linked to roast profiles, and I used to
Mhm.
think that with darker roast profiles, you use lower ppm water because they have more intensity, more mouthfeel, and with lighter roast profiles, you use higher ppm. And actually, fun fact is that if you give me the map of the hardness of water from all around the world or major cities around the world, I can
Mm.
tell you what roasting style each of these roasters will have in that city. So Melbourne, very soft water. We roast quite dark because with soft water you lack mouthfeel, you lack intensity. The acidity is too high, and
I
so you
see.
need to roast darker to compensate for that. You look at Copenhagen, for example, where the water is crazy hard, or even
Mhm.
Paris, for example, right now the water is crazy hard. There's a lot of minerals inside, and so even if you use filters, even if you use RO systems, the concentration that roasters use for quality control is still really high. And so we see usually that um, people roast extremely light. because
Mhm.
there's so much intensity out of the water that you need to tone down what the coffee, what the roast is. So there is definitely a pattern with roasting. I
Yeah.
think there's also a pattern with grind size, and, these are the two things that we noticed initially. And then now I'm trying to figure out whether it's more of a strength thing, or whether it's roasting or grinding, or maybe a combination of all three. But this is generally a pattern that we observe.
We talked about like for different type of process, there is a formula that can lift up certain complexity or like certain type of perspective aspect from the coffee. So is there a formula that you usually use to approach the coffee at the first time? Like if you taste the coffee, but you will have to mineralize your water first. Is that a baseline that you usually prefer to use?
Not, I mean, the safest baseline I would say is Conflux, because I think it's the most versatile of all of the profiles that we have. If I was like, if you gave me a random bag of coffee, unknown bag of coffee, the first thing I would do is make a brew with demineralized water and taste it. I wouldn't have any minerals inside of my water, because let's say if I put tonic, then I'm gonna have a bias, and the expression of the coffee is gonna be skewed, because it's going to be brighter than its baseline. And same thing if I put jam and I taste it, maybe the acidity is completely muted, and I might go, oh, the coffee doesn't have much acidity. But it's also the minerals have impacted that. So you're not just assessing your coffee if you have minerals in your water. You're assessing this coffee with these minerals, basically. So it needs to be taken into consideration. Like, you can't just look at one aspect, basically, if that makes sense.
Wonderful. Thank you for answering those questions. And now is question time. We
Yeah,
have a couple
shoots.
questions in the chat box, and so everybody, please feel free to ask those questions. So I do have I can read those questions, so it goes into the recording for us. So Manuel has a question. I've been using the recipe for 7 drops of tonic, 7 drops of jam, and 9 drops of lilac per gallon of water. So it gives me water with around 17 to 19 ppm, ppm TDS, ppm. And it has been working amazingly well for my coffee. So Manuel's concern if low TDS is something that will affect health. So Simon, what do you think about like minerals and absorbing minerals from the coffee that
Yeah,
we?
yeah. Regarding the health, I mean, in general, you should not be drinking. You should not be drinking demineralized water exclusively. That's the reason why it's advised against, because our bodies need minerals to function. So we need a mix of magnesium, calcium, sodium, potassium, bicarbonates in order to function. So if you're only hydrating yourself with demineralized water, long run, you'll have issues. And what happens a lot of the time is that minerals are easily soluble into water. And so if you drink exclusively demineralized water, then you actually will lose minerals, because the water, as it exits your body, will actually load itself up with some minerals. So you might be in mineral deficiency in the long run. Now, brewing coffee with minerals, with no minerals is a different thing, because coffee itself is loaded with minerals. So coffee is loaded with potassium, for example. Coffee naturally has traces of magnesium, calcium, etc. So by the time you're drinking that, you're basically inhaling and ingesting some minerals. So there's no, I guess, health concern on that.
Cool. From a chemical, this is from Randall. From a chemical or sensory standpoint, what are the primary differences in the final cup when adding Apex profiles to the brewing water before and versus
Yeah,
dropping directly into? I think this question is oftentimes
it's
asked.
a very common question that we get. So as I was mentioning earlier, I don't know if you were on the call at that time, Randall, but essentially, if you're brewing two different coffees, or the same coffee with two different waters, one that has no minerals, one that has minerals inside, regardless of the combination of minerals and the concentration, you'll extract the exact same amount of compounds. So if you measure the TDS and you measure the extraction, you'll read the exact same measurements. And so what this suggests is that minerals don't participate in the extraction process, contrary to what people might think, or contrary to what coffee science has said for many years. And What we do notice though is that the two coffees are completely different. And so minerals participates in highlighting different attributes and they impact our taste receptors. They basically enhance or inhibit specific attributes like acidity, bitterness, sweetness. And so whether you add the minerals before brewing or after brewing essentially makes no difference. The one thing where so when we run countless panels in order to test that as well. And we wanted to see can expert tasters and also non-expert tasters notice the difference, whether it's post-brew or pre-brew. And we the conclusion was that people could not taste the difference. Even like, curators, even expert tasters could not tell the difference. And so usually we notice that there might be some differences if you're not adding exactly the same amount. And sometimes it can be a little bit difficult to figure out exactly the exact same amount number of drops. So we might have one drop more into the cup than into the kettle. And so those tiny differences, because the each drop is very concentrated, they make a massive difference into the final cup. So that is usually the difference. And also whether everything was fully homogenized. So if you're adding a few drops to your cup, if you're not swirling the cup thoroughly, or if you're not stirring, for example, then you might not get as much homogeneity. And a good example for me is, let's say you're making pasta. You can add the salt into your water, for example. You can add it afterwards into your pasta directly, or let's say even like, or maybe pasta is not the best example, but let's say you're baking vegetables in the oven. You're adding black pepper to your vegetables. You can add it directly in the oven or into the dish directly. And usually the main difference is the homogenization and the absorption of the black pepper by the vegetables. The same thing with water and coffee. You just want to make sure that it's homogeneous and it's evenly distributed, and you essentially get the same results.
So before, after, and then now we have another question from Dulce is higher temperature, lower temperature. So does the water
Yeah,
temperature affect the mineral content
great
pre-brew?
question. Yes. So yes and no. No, in the sense that when you're heating up your water, it doesn't impact the minerals themselves. Like they remain unchanged. But what happens though is if you heat up your water for a long time, let's say your water is at 95 degrees for Celsius, so I guess like 200-ish Fahrenheit. If you have your water at that temperature for a while, it will start to evaporate. As water evaporates, the minerals don't evaporate. The minerals stay inside of your kettle. Only water evaporates. So if the volume of your water reduces, if you had it heating up for an hour, for example, you basically have the same amount of minerals, but with less water. So your concentration is actually going up. So the minerals themselves, they don't get impacted. So they don't get denatured, they don't get destroyed, they don't disappear because of heat. But what happens is, again, as water evaporates, as the volume of water reduces, your concentration is going to go up.
Amazing. This is something that is more like nuance that we need to understand for brewing as well. So Jonathan has a question. Do the minerals reduce each other's effectiveness when you use them together?
Yes, some of them do. So, for example, magnesium enhances the perception of acidity. I'm stressing the word perception because the level of acidity is measured by pH, so potential of hydrogen, which basically is not impacted by magnesium. So if I add magnesium to my water, it's not changing the pH of my water, so tangible measurement of acidity, but it will change the perception of acidity. So basically tricks your brain into believing something is more acidic than it is. So if you're adding, let's say, magnesium, you're increasing the acidity, the perception of acidity in your coffee. But if you're adding bicarbonate, bicarbonate actually impacts the pH. So bicarbonate will increase the pH, so reduce the acidity. So if you're adding both magnesium and bicarbonate, you are basically doing two opposite things. One is giving you more acidity, the other one is giving you less acidity. So in that case, they can reduce each other's effectiveness. Not
Ah,
all of them do reduce each other's effectiveness, but they can in a way. And actually, if you add a few drops of tonic, you try your coffee, it's more acidic, and then you add a few drops of jam, now you have more body, but acidity has gone down. And that's because jam has a lot of bicarbonates, and so it comes and kind of balances the magnesium and sodium in tonic, for example.
yeah, and that's good to know because it will probably make you keep on adding minerals, then you're over mineralizing your coffee. So
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. Mhm.
So Mohammed says he's only able, they're only able to access to magnesium sulfate and sodium bicarbonate in their area. Is that enough?
So think of it as cooking, and let's say you only have access to salt and pepper. Is that enough to cook? Yeah, you can cook with salt and pepper. That's fine. Are you going to make the best dish possible with only salt and pepper? I highly doubt. Are you going to get the most out of coffees with that? I don't think. I don't think necessarily. So it's fine, but you might be lacking complexity. You might be lacking nuances.
Hmm.
You're going to be very limited with what you can do. And
Mm,
also in general, magnesium sulfates is great for floral coffees, but for coffees that don't have this potential for floral notes, it's going to induce, in my opinion, unnecessary bitterness. So, and I wouldn't use a lot of magnesium sulfate. So, if I had to use two minerals, I would probably look at something like magnesium chloride and potassium bicarbonate, for example. These two, I think, are a lot more versatile.
cool. So next question from Desiree Desire. How do you approach water design differently for underdeveloped, well-developed, and slightly overdeveloped roast profiles? Are there flavor characteristics that water simply cannot fix?
Yeah, so it's a great question. Um, in general, water can fix most of these things. But again, I think what it's a hard one in the sense that I always say that if the coffee is not amazing, so water or minerals won't make a bad coffee taste phenomenal, but they can take a good coffee to fantastic. And so in that sense, they can still do, or they can get a bad coffee to taste okay or taste good. And so there's still a lot of heavy lifting that you can do. With let's say an underdeveloped coffee, usually what you can expect is some grassiness. You can expect a lack of mouthfeel. Minerals can definitely do that. Grassiness is not something that you can get rid of with minerals, but usually my strategy for this is putting the focus on another attribute. So, for example, if you have this herbal, grassy quality, which I personally hate in coffee, that's the reason why I drink coffee and not matcha. I would not necessarily use lilac in that case because lilac is going to highlight this floral, maybe grassy notes. Instead, I might look at something like tonic to not put the spotlight on that grassiness, but put the spotlight on the acidity. And so if the focus is then on the acidity, you might then not perceive the grassiness as much. And so I would probably look at something like tonic and conflux because an undeveloped coffee usually underlies also a lack of mouthfeel and body. So conflux is probably good at that as well. And same thing with overdeveloped roasts. In general, jam is really good at reducing bitterness in these coffees. It's good at working with the natural sweetness that you get with something that's a bit too dark. So there are things that you can fix. You obviously can't do magic. You can't get jasmine and pineapple magically with minerals out of the coffee. But it's still a lot of heavy lifting that you can do.
That's great to know. We have three more questions.
Mhm.
Hey, Danny asks, Hi Simon. For someone who wants to consistently brew at championship level, like yourself, what is your foundational Apex mineral formula and how do you decide whether to adjust your water recipe in the kettle versus dialing in with post drops?
It's a great question. I do have go-to recipes based on different coffees. But in general, I brew with dimmerized water and I make the first adjustments into the cup. So I'll brew with dimmerized water, taste the coffee, make some adjustments. And then once I'm happy with how it's tasting in the cup, then that's when I work the recipe backwards, like we saw in the second to last slides. And then I do that into my kettle. Usually what happens is, in my mind, I work in percentages of maximum potential. So if I'm sort of like 80% happy with what my coffee tastes like when I'm adding the drops into the cup directly, then I'm going to put that into the kettle. I'm going to scale that up. And then you might make some further micro adjustments from there to your whole kettle recipe. And so you might make those tweaks at that point from the kettle once you've done that, once you've made the move from final cup to kettle. But I'm always open to brewing with water that has minerals inside, tasting it, and then making like just a one drop adjustment into the cup. And then we had to do that a lot for the World Championship in the sense that we a lot of the coffees that we were making were lacking this creamy mouthfeel that we were looking for. And so a lot we had moved already to the full kettle recipe, and so we're brewing, and sometimes we're like, you know what, like I feel like just a little bit more tonic, a little bit more conflux would fix it. And so instead of straight away making another water with a little bit more conflux, I would just add one drop of conflux into the cup, and we taste it. And if it feels like the right amount, then you can scale that to the kettle. But if you go, yeah, it's the right direction, but it's just a bit too intense, then it's easy. Instead of, let's say, one drop per cup would be 6 drops into the whole kettle, maybe we go a 6 drop but 3 drops. And so that's a way that you can sort of like mix the two different approaches and have like a hybrid model. And that's how we would do it.
Very cool. Two more questions. Um, do minerals still work when they're added to cold filter water? Sorry, cold filter coffee, like cold brew or cold filter coffee, milk-based drinks, other things like other beverages, like for example, beer, matcha, or other things.
Yeah.
Or do they only work with brewed coffee?
They work with everything actually. Minerals work in everything. They work in hot, they work in food, they work in cold beverages. Again,
Wine.
the magic happens, yeah, wine. So the magic happens you when minerals meet any food or beverages and basically send different, stronger signals to your taste receptors. The magic happens when everything is combined into your mouth, basically. So
Mm,
in general, for cold beverages, you need to add more minerals. And that's what we see with beers. I've designed water for beer makers in the past, which is very fun. I don't drink beer at all, but based on them telling me, oh, the beer is tasting like this and it's tasting like that, I know exactly what adjustments to make to the minerals. And so we find that in general, as something is cold, you don't perceive the attributes as much. So think of beer in general. When it's served ice cold, the bitterness is a lot less prominent. But when you're drinking room temperature beer, it's just like very bitter. Same thing with Coca-Cola. When Coca-Cola is room temperature, it's just sweet. It's just disgusting. But as soon as
yeah.
you serve it cold with ice cubes, it's a lot more enjoyable. You don't perceive the sweetness as much. So really high temperatures, really low temperatures mute the perception of different attributes. So in general, for any cold drinks, I would add more minerals. And milk-based as well, they work similarly. Um, you might just need to add more because it's a bigger beverage as well. The amount of minerals that you use is usually dependent on the beverage volume and the temperature of that beverage.
Very cool. Thank you. This is the very last question. Travis, does any of your formula work against each other? Let's say tonic and jam enhances acidity, one reduces it. Would you recommend not use these two in the same ratio in water formula? This is a similar question than what we had before. Do you have
Yeah,
a answer specific to?
similar.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, similar question to the one that we answered before, but essentially, I would not advise to use them together. I actually think tonic and jam work really well together. I
Yeah.
personally like coffees that are high acid, but also high sweetness and body, and so I tend to use these two together. And I think they do cancel each other out in a way, but you're never going back to baseline. So essentially, what happens is, let's say let's say your acidity is here and then your body is here. These are two important levers in coffee. If you're if we're adding tonic, the acidity goes up here. So essentially, the the perception of acidity is high because there's a big gap between, I mean, it's gonna higher, right? And there's a big gap between mouthfeel and acidity. If we wanted to reduce the acidity, either we could do something to reduce acidity, or one trick that works really, really well is to increase the mouthfeel. And so all of a sudden, if you're increasing mouthfeel, you haven't reduced the acidity, but you've reduced the relative acidity. So you increase mouthfeel, sweetness, and now they're at the same level. And that's exactly what happens when you're adding jam to something that already has tonic. You're not reducing the acidity necessarily, but you're increasing the mouthfeel and the sweetness. And so basically you're reducing the relative acidity. And a good
So
example again for me is, oh yeah, go ahead.
go ahead.
A good example for me is Coca-Cola.
Mm.
It's super, super acidic. If you measure the pH of Coca-Cola, it's the same as lemon. So very acidic. But because they add, so the acidity level of Coca-Cola is up here. And technically, if you were, if I mean, no one can. It's not very pleasant to be drinking just like freshly pressed and squeezed lemon juice, right? It's too acidic. So to compensate for that high acid, what they did is they added a lot of sugar, and so your acidity hasn't gone down. You just increase the amount of sugar. That it doesn't that doesn't decrease the acidity, but it decreases the perception of acidity. It also works the other way around. Like they made the drink very sugary, and then in order to make it remotely drinkable, they had to add a lot of acidity to compensate. So working with relative perceptions, I think works pretty well, and so you can definitely combine them. But they do have this cancellation effect in that sense. You're not going back to baseline. It's not because you're adding 1 gram of tonic and 1 gram of jam per liter of water that you're going back to zero. If that makes
Very
sense.
interesting because when you were explaining this, came to mind the five different tastes that we have. They work together, lift each other up, or they can mute
Hmm.
each other. So basically, it goes back to that original saying of this is like seasoning for coffee, and then it can bring something out of the coffee. And when work together, it can help lift up and create more complexity for the entire experience itself. So thank you so much for um, spending a time with us. I know this is usually like when you have a workshop in some cities that people have to go physically to see you and ask you questions, and this is a really great opportunity. And thank you so much for waking up early and getting us in a room and get us to ask questions. So I hope everybody enjoyed a lot these this session. Any final things that you want to give us, the tips or tricks or like a bit of advice on how to brew coffee better with the water that we have?
Yeah, again, I think you need to look at water and coffee as two separate ingredients, and they can't be dissociated because you need, I mean, you need water to brew coffee. And so I think a lot of people see, or maybe less now, but some people see minerals as additives, and obviously they work as additives, but they're essentially a whole ingredient on their own. So this, I mean, they need to be treated as two separate ingredients. And I think the more focus you put on your water, the I mean, the better your coffee is going to be tasting. Um, and that's something that I don't think I've regretted putting a lot of effort into water when I'm dialing in a coffee, whether it's at home or in competition. And I'll in full confidence actually for this world championship, when we debriefed with the rest of the team, one of the things that I think we didn't do really well is we didn't, even this year we didn't spend enough time on water. I feel like we spent more time on playing with blend ratios and blend components, and we spent less time than previous years dialing in water. And I do think that we didn't necessarily get the most out of the coffee. And and it sounds crazy because like we've known for years that water makes a massive impact, and every single year we make miracles. We make the coffee taste amazing in the last minutes by changing the water, and somehow this year we, because I think we thought we got to the end results quicker, but I still think that we had room to improve the water. So I think it's one of these variables that is now not getting so overlooked anymore. People, I think, are aware of the impact that it has, but you need to
Right.
experience it for yourself to see how, you know, how much more you can push coffee when you find the right balance. When the stars are aligning and you find that right combination for a specific coffee is just like, yeah, yeah, the returns are exponential.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Simon. I want to ask everybody to, if you are interested in taking a photo all together in one page, if you wanted to turn on your camera or if you wanted to show your face, let's say a good hi to Simon and
Thanks, everyone.
yeah, hi everyone. So I'm gonna take a photo of all of you guys and then
Ah, nice.
yeah, I will put it in this stack of PDF. If you don't want your photo taken, it's totally okay. Um, but I want to put that and then some as a piece of memory for this class, the cohort of the Origami Cup 2026 education series. So I'll count, and some people are still turning on the camera. So I'll count to three,
Great
and
to
then
see
I
you
will
all.
take a screenshot Is everybody ready? Say hi. Okay. One, two, three. Okay, let's do it one more time.
Nice. And to answer the last two questions from Desiree, Julie free stock. I'm sorry, Desiree, we finished the Julie one. It was a limited edition, so we won't be releasing it, but there might be one similar in the future. And question from Darun, we just shipped our order to India to Brewing Gadgets last week, so it should arrive within a week. But yeah, thanks everyone for. Oh, and Motors Justin says, yeah, Motors is a great profile. So we've done collaboration profiles or limited editions as well that are different from the ones that we have as well. They all
Yeah.
have their nuances and differences, and you can have a look at the websites on what these ones have. And there seems to be a lot of love for the Julith and Motors profile as well. So yeah, glad that you guys enjoy these ones.
Yeah. We also have four new
Hmm.
profiles coming on those collab profiles coming to Slow Pour. I think it's landing soon
Yes.
with us, so very excited. As usual, it's kind of like the conversation before, like you explore your coffee with the different type minerals, and then expand this possibility of sensory experience. You can discover so much more in your coffee when you are bold to explore it. And I wish everybody the best if you're competing for Origami Cup in the coming Saturday. Good luck to everyone, and thank you so much, Simon, for sharing your wisdom with us. Thank you,
Thanks
Simon.
everyone. Thanks Anita for organizing this, and great to see
Bye,
you all. Thank you.
everyone. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.